country and around the globe to share their experience, strength, and hope as testimony to Bill Wilson's enduring legacy of recovery. No matter what brought you, you have a virtual seat, and we welcome you. Tonight we have two very special speakers who I'm looking forward to hearing. And I'm going to go out to my friend Tim C. in Tucson, Arizona for an introduction. Tim, if you on mute.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm an alcoholic and addict here from Tucson, Arizona. I am really honored tonight to welcome our friends Paige and Fred H. from Amelia Island. I got to meet Fred many years ago at the Hazelden Renewal Center, where I got a taste of Drop the Rock, The Ripple Effect, his book, which is wonderful. And I got to meet Fred as a result. I got to meet Fred and Paige there. And it's just been an incredible watching them. They walk the walk better than, anybody in my life in recovery, and just so inspirational. So without further ado, I'll just turn it over to Fred.
Thanks, Tim. My name's Fred, and I'm an alcoholic. It's a real honor to be here tonight. Honor to be alive. Honor to be thriving in this pandemic. And I've had a long association since 2003 with the Wilson House. And last year in the fall would have been my 18th annual fall seminar. And I hope we can fire that up again this fall. And so it's a wonderful pilgrimage to make and a wonderful organization to support. I was born on the first full day of summer, 1948, in the middle of the night under a full moon. And my astrologer later shrieked when she read that, but it all kind of fits into my story. I was raised all along the main line of the Great Burlington Northern Railroad between Seattle and St. Paul, Minnesota. I went to 5 different grade schools, 1 middle school, and 3 different high schools. I came of age in Great Falls, Montana, grades 5 through 10. And when I went off to college, I experienced for the very first time in my life a sense of community. It's still something that I was so unfamiliar with. People, groups, people you know for a long time. And so my lifelong friendships start in college. My earliest memories are of medical conditions. I had my first eye surgery at 18 months. My second eye surgery at 24 months. I was wearing glasses, I think even before my first eye surgery. And I think I'll mute my dings here. I wound up with, my condition was called amblyopia, wandering eye. Later, I put on my Facebook religious preference, amblyopia, because I think I have a wandering eye when it comes to religion. And there's quite a menu out there, which I keep ordering from. The polio at the age of 4 in 1952 in the Wenatchee, Washington epidemic. One of the family stories that's told is that I, on the way to the hospital, asked my mother, if you were me, would you be brave? And her response was, no, Freddie, if you were I, would you be brave? More on that later. I remember from that, the smell of the rubber bladders and the clicking of the iron lungs that filled the hallways of the hospital in Wenatchee. I remember the kid in the bed next to me who chewed up my rubber train. I remember later learning that my favorite nurse, Mary, had died of polio. And I remember a quarantined birthday party in the backyard. No masks, but perimeter seating only. I was again very fortunate. I wound up with just a smaller left calf, which most people didn't even notice. But it didn't stop me from pointing it out to them. I remember the hot baths that we got. I later learned that they weren't to heal you, they were to try to manage the pain. I do not remember the pain. I don't take hot baths today, I take showers. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist to kind of figure out why, but one of the things that I've learned in my recovery is that I can revisit my history and have a different opinion about what was going on at the time. And one of the things that has become so clear to me is that I've really let up on being critical of me and my childhood. And I love that expression of I was doing the best I could given my set of circumstances at that time. And Paige often says I'm courageous. I'm also a 50-year type 1 diabetic, and it really doesn't feel courageous. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just eat a meal without all of the prep stuff you do when you've got to supplement your own pancreas. I passed out in the allergist's office in the 3rd grade in Minot, North Dakota, being a very oversensitive child, similarly with the pollens that they put in the scratches in my back, and anaphylactic shock. It was much harder on my mom than on me. But these are kind of some of the memories. The other thing I remember from my eye surgeries was getting hit with the ether. And I literally remember what it was like to take that first breath. And I never knew what the paraphernalia was until I saw the movie Cider House Rules, and Michael Caine's character would have an ether cocktail hour at 5 o'clock. And it's a metal frame with cloth on it, and they spill the ether on it. And I think it also, that set up an old neural pathway of a pretty powerful one that was also triggered when I first had my experience of the intoxicating and smell of effects of alcohol. I learned later, showing movies at a detox of Father Martin's wonderful 16 millimeter film, Chalk Talk, when he mentions that alcohol is like a water molecule different than ether. They're both central nervous system depressants. So I remember also from my childhood, my mother and I worrying about my health and my father's health. He had a heart murmur. And it's such an interesting, murmur is a really beautiful word, but when it's a heart murmur, it can be terrifying. Later, our worry paid off because he did have a heart attack when I was a junior in high school. But my mother's way of looking at things, when she called me, she said, "Your dad's in the hospital." I said, "Oh, did he have a heart attack?" And she said, "No, he had a coronary insufficiency." I got, "Oh, great. Whew. Dodged a bullet on that one." So fear, oversensitivity, anxiety, achingly wanting to please people were so characteristic of what I experienced growing up. And I think the most powerful family dynamic was my mother's hatred of my father's drinking. She was an adult child from an alcoholic family up in northern Minnesota. And Paige confirmed it, as I didn't think that my dad was an alcoholic, but she was totally oversensitive to it. So I was raised, as a child would be, in an alcoholic family without there being an alcoholic. Just the untreated codependency and adult child of alcoholics preoccupation, and it was very painful. I was kind of an emotional clone of my mother. My dad was off with a very successful career with the railroad, and she and I did a lot together. I was essentially a bedwetting mother's boy, and I say that with great pride today because it all makes sense. So at age 14, I discovered alcohol, and I now call it, a chemical solution to all of my anxieties and oversensitivity. I have very keen memories of from all of my senses the moment that happened. The smell and the taste of the beer. The sun was orange because of forest fires in Glacier Park. I was in Great Falls, Montana, and there was a sting in the smell of the air because of those fires. I remember touching the texture of the white picket fence I was drinking beer next to, and the feel of the thick wax on the fountain paper cup that I was drinking tap beer out of. Amazing how spiritual moments, that was a spirit's moment, but spiritual moments bring with it such acuity of the senses and memory from that time. Going off to college was like dying and going to heaven. No restraints. My drinking in high school was pretty contained. But in college, I stayed up all night, the first night, pitching quarters in the freshman dorm. I was totally unprepared to live life, even in the structure of a dorm. So I sampled a lot of different drugs. There's some pretty good acid back then. I went to a small liberal arts school in the Palouse country of southeastern Washington. And I remember lying on our backs, looking up at the clouds before dawn one night. But the next morning I was reading the Spokesman Review in the fraternity living room, and I thought I heard my chromosomes crack. So I stopped taking LSD. Mescaline did a lot for me in terms of stomach energy and kind of excitement, but I always went back to alcohol. And that's why I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous today. At age 22, I developed type 1 diabetes, and yet drank for the next 5 years. I think I quit for 6 months. Kind of testing out this new thing, but that's a tough combination. There's a lot of useless calories in alcohol and beer, which was my drug of no choice. And so it was a real decline over those 5 years. And I wound up at 146 pounds, wasted away, literally, and dying. I hated to admit it, but in looking back on it, I was actually dying. A failed suicide attempt at the age of 27, wound up in the emergency room. And I experienced a life-changing question. I've had 3 questions asked of me in my life that I recall that were life-changing. And the ER doc asked me, "When have you tried to kill yourself before?" And I later learned in my education for working in human services for the last 40 years that it's a highly engineered question by Albert C. Kinsey, an open-ended assumptive question, and it's meant to get information from people who don't want to give you information. And because I'd had such a strong relationship and positive relationship and nurturing relationship with medical staff my entire life, I always pay close attention. I'm currently getting my medical care at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, and I am just happy as I can be to get great medical care that I can trust because I'm a very cautious consumer of medical services. So I was listening carefully, and when he asked me, I said, well, when have I tried to kill myself before? And that was the first real attempt. But in that moment, some internal armature of something changed inside of me. And I went from what was a flippant, profane version of leave me alone to what should I do next? Now, I was an early crisis Christian, foxhole Christian, and when things got tough, I'd really, I'd rush off and, get me out of this one, Lord, and I'll build a church. But something happened inside of me where I not only asked for help, I actually followed through. I followed directions, and I've been doing it since. I consider it to be a significant spiritual experience in my life. And I've come to define the undefinable, love to do that, of spiritual experience. One way that I look at it is a remarkable and unexpected turn for the better, which turns out to be perfect for everybody involved. No losers in a spiritual experience. And this remarkable and unexpected turn for the better resulted in my then seeing a psychiatrist because I tried to kill myself. And for a $25 copay, I had a 20-minute conversation with a psychiatrist who said, you're not depressed, you're a young alcoholic, you need to get treatment. I went to treatment. I've been following directions ever since. So when I look back on it, I had a spiritual experience in that hospital ER sufficient to bring about a start to my recovery. And the rest of my story can be told in a lot of different ways. My first real religion was superstition. Step on a crack and break your mother's back. I would discern that I'd do something, and then I would be entering into a period of good things happening. And then I'd do something else, and I'd enter into a period of bad things happening. And I don't know how pathological it is, but it was my attempt to feel safe and my attempt to try to be in control. And I don't think it really worked very well. But I didn't know how to pray. And I asked someone, I don't know how to pray. And they said, do you know any prayers? I said, yeah, because I had kind of an OCD prayer set that I would do before I went to sleep at night. And he said, say that one. So that night, I got on my knees on the side of my bed and said, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. What a horrible prayer to give children. Just like Bluebeard and the troll under the bridge. I did not really have trauma in my life the way I know many other people have had trauma in their lives and their childhoods. But my oversensitivity created traumatic experiences for me. I know that psychiatrists call oversensitive people stimulus augmenters. So happy birthday, normal kid. Happy birthday, Fred. It's a pretty nice set of principles for being self-centered and being special in the universe. So it was a start. And what I've come to believe is that if my heart's right, it doesn't make any difference what I say in terms of prayer or meditation. If my heart is right, the process will evolve into my getting better. 3 years into sobriety, I met Paige. Along with sobriety, one of the greatest gifts in my life. And I often really reflect on the fact that a lot of why people appreciate me is Paige comes along. And old soul, whatever it is, I lucked out. Another early drug for me was puppy love oxytocin. And every time I'd move, I'd fall in love the first day of school with some face, way too self-conscious to ever talk to them. But I'd get as much information as I could, just kind of third grade, fourth grade stalker, a beneficent stalker. But I was so lucky to fall head over heels in love with Paige. And along with Paige came her sponsor, Marion F. And I learned from Marion the metaphysical principles of the steps before I learned the steps in the big book. And I was fascinated by these sets of principles, the law of averages, the law of a lot of things. Do I have about 20 minutes to talk? I think I've talked almost 19. Okay. So I was a 12-year latecomer to being a student of the Big Book, a 30-year latecomer to being a student of the 12 and 12. And 35 years into sobriety, I read again Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. And I finally discovered this ocean of metaphysical information as a part of the New Thought movement, that if I were to be cornered and asked, what's your religion? I'd say I'm a New Thought movement person. So in reading the wonderful history of writing, titled Writing the Big Book, the author talks about how Bill Wilson altered the events that he wrote about in the Big Book significantly from how others reported what happened. And he said we often modify our histories to match what's going on in our lives today. And my best example of that is just maybe a year ago, I asked my sister about that ride to the hospital when I was with polio and said, can you believe Mom told me when I asked her, if you were me, would you be brave? She corrected my English. And she said, no, Fred, that's not what the family story was. The family story was, you said, if you were I, would you be brave? And we all marveled how a 4-year-old would speak that kind of English. So later I was making amends to a great harm to a person, and they didn't really recall that big of a harm. But before we hung up, they said, you even corrected my parents' English. That's what they remembered. So understanding things became the most important part of my surviving moving every year. And I capitalized on being a good student. And I happened to be tall, so I was the tall, new, good student. But I listened carefully, and understanding really brought me security. And so the joy of my now long-term sobriety is that every day I get to understand at a deeper level the infinite truth that this wisdom tradition offers us, not only in the greatest hour of our initial need, but now as we trudge the road of happy destiny, dealing with the less than ruinous, within conventional bounds, character defects that continue to give me touchstones for my continued spiritual growth. Thank you.
I'm thinking I start now. Is that correct? I guess. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great, Paige. Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thanks. Now, is somebody doing something before I speak? No? I just get to look at beautiful Michelle. When I met Michelle, she had short hair and she was so gorgeous, and now she has long hair and she's still more gorgeous. My name is Paige, and I'm an alcoholic. It's such a gift to speak with all of you. I mean, I don't know how many people are here, but I saw these little chats coming up from Edmonton and Florida and California and different places. And it's just really cool that we're just all united, even though we can't see each other, but our spirits are here together. I love that. And, that was a profound thing for me in my early days and months of sobriety. Was thinking about, it makes me cry. There's two things. First of all, I want to introduce myself the way I used to hear people do that when I first got sober. And that is that I have not found it, how do I control my camera? Stay put. That I have not found it necessary to take a drink since August 11th of 1976. I don't usually introduce myself that way today, but I think it's a wonderful way to introduce ourselves, because I remember when I would hear that, and the first time I heard that, it just struck me so hard, like, it's not necessary for you to take a drink? Oh my goodness, that can be true for me, that it's not going to be necessary for me to drink again? It was just profound. And the other thing that I thought about a lot in the first months, which is why this whole, silver lining of COVID with us being connected by Zoom, is that, back in the day when I got sober, there was no internet or no cell phones, and, when there were people in Africa working by themselves or trying to get sober or some other country, and they didn't have anybody, they didn't have another fellow alcoholic to talk to, they would write to the General Service Office. And I would hear these stories. They would write to the General Service Office and ask for a big book, and then that would get mailed to them. And then they might write letters back and forth. You could volunteer to be a pen pal in AA for somebody. So I think about that with how blessed we really are. And for me, I'll just start at what it used to be like. I grew up with a mom who was quite gregarious and quite a live wire and quite a party person and a real alcoholic. And I didn't know that she was a real alcoholic till later. To me, she was glamorous, and she was Grace Kelly. And then I saw Auntie Mame on TV, and she was Auntie Mame. And then later on, I read or saw Christina Crawford interviewed about Mommy Dearest, and I said, oh my God, that's my mother. So my mother was lots of things rolled into one, and she was a very powerful force in my life. And she loved to drink, and she loved to party, and she loved to be glamorous and dress up, and she had cigarette holders to match all her outfits in many colors, and her shoes, and she'd create hats and add things to them. And so she was quite the bon vivant, I guess. And she lost her first two husbands, I believe, because of her alcoholism. And when I was 10 that year, I lost my second father. I lost my brother because he wound up going to live with my second father, my only brother. And then my own father, biological father, died. And that was a big year for me because, what I realized about my early childhood is I think I was really happy when I was a baby till about 3. I see pictures and I look like a little free spirit who was kind of floating around. And then, and I think and overall I was a good person, and I don't know enough about child psychology to know whether some of this stuff is okay or not okay. But I do, I shifted into the blame game by the time I was 4. There's a story of, being in a wading pool and them coming out, my father coming out and saying, "Now you need to get out of the pool now." And I said, little Evie said, no. It was little Evie's fault that we weren't getting out of the pool now, not my fault. And then, a little bit later, I would, because my parents were divorced, I would go to my grandmother's in the summer and to my father's, and this was in Memphis, and they sent me off to camp, and I hated it, and I was afraid, and I didn't want to go again, and so I started lying. I wanted to get out of going to camp. Now, I don't know if that's normal for a 6-year-old to do or not, but that's, my kind of manipulating or angle shooting or not being honest started pretty young, and then later on in school when I had to give a speech, I didn't think I was worthy. I made up a story about my trip to Bermuda, only I hadn't been to Bermuda. My mother had. And then I froze in the speech, and when the teacher tried to help me out because he'd been to Bermuda, I was lost because I hadn't been there. So, and then I was afraid to fess up. Well, guess what? I haven't been to Bermuda. So, anyway, my drinking started in my childhood with sipping drinks at after parties, our parents' parties. But the first intoxication that I recall is age 10. And I was at Princeton University. My parents liked to go up there and party. My third father had gone to Princeton. And I got served beer by Cosmo Iacobazzi, who was a famous kicker for Princeton. And I got high, and I was free. I was so free. I could talk to any of those adults because I was like the only little kid running around there. And I could dance, and I just felt like Tommy B from Canada used to say, just kind of filled up my skin. My drinking, I just realized not that long ago, was really a binge pattern of drinking. And I've always said that I think that the binge pattern people are some of the sickest alcoholics there are, because we think that we can control it, because we could stop for a little while. And that's kind of what my story was. I would like go to a party, get drunk, have a blackout, pass out, vomit, whatever, and then I'd go home and say, oops, I'm not going to do that again, and it must have been the gin. I won't drink gin again. Or I'd go to a party, and it was like slow gin that we drank, and I would think, it was the fruit juice and the slow gin, I'll just drink this the next time. So it was switching a lot for a while, and then it was that I would control my life with activities. So in high school, hockey, I played lacrosse, I was a cheerleader, and, I was a person whose insides did not match her outsides. People always thought I looked poised, I looked together, I looked like I was just this gracious, kind of fine person. And I recently went to a high school reunion, and you know what? None of our insides matched our outsides. That's what I learned. And the freedom of age, you start to talk about what you were really like when you were a kid, what was really going on in your house. And all of us were struggling with our own things, and nobody talked about it. And I think the world's a little different today in that we encourage that. But that's the way it was then. So off to college I went. I skipped a year. I skipped a grade, so I was a year ahead of myself. I graduated when I was 17. And now this is the socially acceptable reason for socially unacceptable behavior. I was going to go to France for the year in between high school and college. What really happened is that my drug use started to get out of control, and my alcohol use. I didn't get it together to apply to go to France. My grandmother didn't really want me to go to France. She was going to help pay for it. And so I just took the year off, and then kind of had to pull things together to go to college. A lot of traumatic things happened that year with my stepfather's behavior. I heard someone recently say, one of the things is that there is no pride of authorship in Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that I really know about myself, I learned from all of you, or you have said or taught me. And, I saw and heard things as a child that I should not have seen and heard. And they harmed me. They did harm me. So I ran away from home. My stepfather came home and did something inappropriate, and I took off. I ran away from home, and my mother did not believe me when I shared what he had done. And so I just said, that's it, I'm leaving town. And I began this pattern. Like one time I ran away to Nantucket with some friends and lived there for about a month, a couple of weeks in a very gorgeous home, and a week out in the brush. And I'm reminded of the movie Car Wash, because I was doing the car wash toilette, washing my hair and my face and doing my change of clothes and everything in the public bathroom in downtown Nantucket. I didn't think anything was wrong with any of the things that I was doing, and I was very rebellious. Like the police would have to bring me home. I would go out and I would miss my curfew, and I'd be so terrified of my mother's rage that I just said, well, I'll just stay out all night because I really don't want to go home and face what she's got to say. And then I would be gone for like 2 or 3 days, and then the police would be looking for me. And then when I get home, my mother would be rageful. But, many years later when we were doing amends, and my amends was a long, long living amends. And my effort to make amends with my mother was just to sort of be there for her. I could not physically be around her very often because my mother was really seriously alcoholic, and things would be good for a few days and then they would deteriorate, and it would be really hard to be with her. But I loved her dearly, and so we would talk on the phone. She was a phone person. And we talked about a lot of things, and we had a wonderful conversation one time about how she just didn't know what to do with me then. And, and I was able to talk about what my behavior was like and why I did what I did. And, she talked about how awful she felt, because I left her with a guy when I ran off to Nantucket. I left this 23-year-old guy at the house. He was drinking gin with her. And then I guess later he tried to make a pass at her. So my house was very alcoholic. My parents would bring home strays from the bar. Then they would pass out. And then I'd get stuck with the stray. And I'd be drinking with the stray, and then he'd be coming on to me, and the whole thing was crazy. And then I'd try to, run away. I mean, it was insane. It's funny. Alcoholism in the early days is glamorous, and mine felt glamorous to begin with, and then it's not. It gets uglier and uglier. So in college, I used college. I really wanted to be a good student, and I wanted to go to college. But really, college was a structure that kind of held me together for a little while until I fell apart again with my using. And that's what would happen. And then I would use a socially acceptable reason to explain my irresponsible, out of control behavior because of my powerlessness over alcohol and drugs. Like, I'm protesting the Vietnam War, therefore I can take incompletes. Or I've got to go home to Memphis to take care of my grandmother because her cook helper is going out for surgery, and so I need to be there for my grandmother, and drop out of college and take incompletes. And I just... any behavior that I had that I didn't care for, I would rearrange it mentally in my mind, rewrite the script, tell myself that script, and then believe the script. And so my lies would become part of the fabric of my being. And I would particularly do that with things that I felt shameful about, or felt embarrassed about, or hated myself for, because I just would try to push them away. I had hepatitis 3 times, and the doctors told me that I was going to die, possibly, of it. And, I wasn't supposed to drink after the first time in 6 months, and I didn't make it. And then what would happen with my alcoholism is it kind of telescoped my disease, because I would throw up, and so I couldn't drink, as long, with my liver being bad. But anyway, I had 2 interventions of wonderful people who got me to help and got me to treatment. And my first time in AA, I didn't make it. I did not believe I was a real alcoholic. I knew I was a drug addict, and I could talk about that here because it's an all 12-step meeting. And so and I did not really understand the disease of alcoholism. Nobody ever explained it. They didn't explain it in treatment, and nobody really explained it in my halfway house where I was in Minneapolis, and I wasn't getting it somehow in AA. So I didn't understand it when the disease talked to me and began to say things like, you're not really an alcoholic. Look, you weren't that bad. Yes, your problem was more drugs. And, those thoughts just kept coming in, and I didn't know what to do with them. I'm trying to live the steps the best I can. And I experienced what the Big Book talks about when it says, there will be a time when you will have no effective mental defense against the first drink. So as earnest as I was, and I was doing all sorts of things. I was going to a women's assertiveness class, and I was going to an outpatient group, and I was going to NA meetings and AA meetings and doing all this stuff. But there were lots of things I didn't know or understand about how to live the steps. And I didn't, because my whole life I had been tucked in and quiet and silent and didn't ask for help and didn't show you how things really were with me. I didn't know. I heard my sponsor say, before we got sober, we didn't know. And then when we get sober and we learn about the program, we become knowers. And so I didn't know. It's not that I was a bad person. It's not that I wasn't trying to be sober. I just didn't know. And so I'm a real advocate for being able to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Or, please help me with this. I don't know what that means, when I got sober, I didn't know what resentment meant. I didn't know even what responsibility meant. I had to ask my counselor, what do you mean be responsible? Really, I had just become so numb to everything. So in sobriety, I have experienced utilizing the things that didn't work from that first time that I was sober. I've incorporated those into my program. And I've learned, finally learned what the disease is all about, that it does talk to you, that it's not doing anything to me physically until I put the drink down the hatch. So it's my mind, it's my emotions. Recently I got some really bad news about my head and my neck, or my neck and my shoulder. And, I had my first MRIs, which were really fun, but, it was a big pill to swallow, and I was having a hard time with it. And I was thinking, I'm really powerless over this. I'm powerless over the condition of my neck. I'm powerless over the condition of my shoulder. But I do have some choices about the unmanageability related to this powerlessness. I can go a lot of different directions with this mentally. I can go a lot of different directions with this emotionally. Or because I've learned how to use the steps and use meditation and use the we and use other people and use challenging my thinking and use kind of inventorying it and use other, all sorts of things, I can have a say with how this really affects me. And I did not know how to do that before I got to AA. I knew nothing about that. So, I have committed myself, I think I'm talking too long, but I have committed myself to being willing to go to any lengths ever since I've gotten sober. There are times like recently when I've had to pull back a little bit with sponsorship because I wore myself out with a very sick person and some people. I just wore myself out. I had nothing left to give. And so, I'm starting up with a person on Sunday where I'm going to go through the 12 steps again with her. She's a woman I did them with another small group of women a few years ago. I'm just taking some time to reboot and rejuice myself. Over the years, I've been a GSR. I try to be of service in any way I can in AA. Whether it's being early for the Zoom meeting or volunteering to get a speaker for the meeting or, offering to get together with somebody at a safe social distance to, talk about the steps or work through the book. I was blessed. I was blessed with wonderful, wonderful people in my early days of sobriety who taught me. And I feel like if they weren't there for me, I wouldn't be here. So I always want to be part of that hand of AA being available for other people because you all saved my life. And, I always like to say that everything that I ever wanted from alcohol and drugs, I have gotten tenfold and more in sobriety. I wanted to be comfortable in my own skin. I wanted to be spontaneous and joyful. I wanted to be free. I wanted to be able to try new things. I wanted to have choices. If I wanted to flirt with somebody, I wanted to know that it was my choice to flirt. It wasn't because I was being sucked into it or something. You know, I wanted to have some autonomy, and I wanted to take risks. Like when I was a little girl, I wanted to dance, and my mother didn't support it because she had danced and hated it and didn't want to. So when I got sober, I took ballet and modern dance classes. And when I got married to Fred, I asked him to take ballet classes with me for a little while. I mean, I think those are a lot of the gifts of sobriety, is that, you know, kind of the sky's the limit. And so I am grateful to be with you all tonight. I cherish you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Paige.
Yeah.
You know, you've been in this room, you and Fred, and you know, we need to have like applause. Lots of applause.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah. I love the Wilson House.
I'm sitting in this big meeting room all by myself, and usually there'd be people going, woo!
I know. Love the Wilson House.
Thank you both so much for sharing your story, and I hope that this fall we can make that number 18 come together, Fred. While we're not going to have open sharing just due to the number of participants, you know, we had over 1,000 at one point knocking on the doors. Well, we're not going to be able to turn on just because of the number of participants. We will turn on the chat at the end of the meeting and leave it open for everyone to connect. And if you would like to share, we have an email. You can send your email to info@wilsonhousefriends.org, and we'll make sure our speakers receive them. We'll post that email address along with links to give if you can contribute. Any amount you can give is appreciated, but regardless, just keep coming back. And finally, before we wrap up, we do have some announcements, and I'm going to go out to my friend Peter W. in Oxnard, California, who celebrated 24 years of continuous sobriety yesterday. So, Peter, so you can unmute and give us some announcements, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Paige and Fred, my great friends. Love you. Please join us next Friday night. For our next Friday Night Live, will be on March 5th. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to welcome another great speaker, Francine W. of Palm Desert, California. You can find all the information at our website, www.wilsonhousefriends.org, which was just posted in the chat, I'm assuming, there by Sean. You can also find the information on our upcoming meetings on the website. Remember, please send any of your shares and feedback to info@wilsonhousefriends.org. And if everyone stay tuned for a few minutes after the meeting, we'll take those interested on a virtual tour of the Wilson House. If you've never seen it or been around, it's a wonderful experience. We'll open up back up the chat and leave this meeting room open for about another 15 or 20 minutes following the tour. The history slideshow will run again for those who missed it at the beginning. And I must thank the Wilson House for being part of my 24 years of sobriety. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Let's take a moment to remember the 12th tradition, which is nearly universal in all our fellowships. So important that usually it's half our name. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. And I've asked Susan R. of Sag Harbor, Long Island, New York, to unmute and read the promises.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan, I'm an alcoholic. Thanks everyone for your shares. And the promises from pages 83 and 84 of the Big Book. If we are painstaking about this phase of development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the world serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Great. Great. Thank you, Susan, for reading the promises, and thank you all who joined us. We had people from all over the country and some check-ins internationally. Really great that everybody was here. Everybody who helped out with this meeting and for their service, Sean C. in Massachusetts, Michelle reading How It Works, Tim in Tucson, Mike in Tucson, Susan, thanks again, Damien, and Ira M. and Rob F., who are also part of this committee, helping put everything together. Our collective gratitude, sincere gratitude to Fred and Paige for sharing with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And let us close up the meeting how we opened, with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. And God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, thanks. Well, the co-host can unmute for a little bit if you'd like. And I'm going to switch back, everyone.
Thank you, Sean, for your service.
That was great.
Yes, thank you, Sean. Thanks, Paige. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, everyone.
Fred.
Awesome to hear you.
Great to hear you guys.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Paige.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Paige. Awesome.